little red dot.
I'm not seeing the red dot. Oh, there it is. Must have been a
Right?
delay.
Did. All right. Well, thank you again for joining. My name is Mary Guerra. I am the Water Quality Education Outreach Coordinator. So I deal with all of our education and outreach, our pre-K through high school lessons, our community outreach, as well as our small grants program. Our small grants program has been around for about 6 years now, and we are excited to open up the grants process for this new year. So I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I am joined with by Leona Walton, also at KC Water. Leona has done a great job of allowing people to enter into our meeting. And Leona, if I could ask for your help in watching, I don't know if any chat might come through or any
Okay.
questions, because once I start sharing my screen, I tend to lose the ability to see.
Okay.
So can we see that okay?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to actually bring this down here. Okay, so on to our slides. There we go.
Is
So
there a
we'll
way to
talk.
make it a little larger though?
Yeah, this is just the last year's grant. I just have a picture of it, but we won't read through all of that. What we're going to
Okay.
do is we're going to talk a little bit about our education and outreach, a little bit of the overview and timeline for this year, a few more identified best practices for the grant. Leona is going to help us understand the city contract a little bit better, and then we'll have some time for questions. So our education and outreach really focuses on understanding watersheds and stormwater runoff that runs through our city, down our infrastructure, down our pipelines, and gets to our waterways. And so we see, if you walk around our city, how all of those storm drains can have trash around them, and that we know because of traveling through our watersheds that they'll eventually make their way to our local streams, our local creeks, and then our Missouri River, to the Mississippi, the Gulf, and then our oceans. And so what we want to focus on are those impacts on water quality, because we know that this particular type of pollution has a real negative impact on our water quality. And so we see that anytime you're around our waterways in Kansas City. Here in the middle, we have a picture of, I believe that's Fresh Creek, and on the right, we have a picture of the Blue River. And so we see all of those contaminants traveling with our stormwater runoff to our waterways. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to have this grant that really helped promote that water quality education. It started in 2015. It supports local nonprofits, and it really focuses on that message of improved water quality through those united efforts. What we wanted to focus on is that groups could help expand our education and outreach. We have a lot of lessons where we target grade school, middle school, high school, work with the community on helping students understand pollution, stormwater runoff through our water quality education. But we knew that other groups could go beyond that, could do more, could reach more communities, could reach more emphasis on that water quality. And so with our expanded outreach, we wanted to introduce water issues through our KC Water lessons. We wanted to have that driving question of how can we impact water quality? And we really wanted those partnerships with our nonprofits, with our community groups, with our schools that help KC Water really emphasize water quality in Kansas City. So talking specifically about the grant, here's a little bit of our timeline. We posted it at the beginning of the month. We're having our pre-bid meeting today, which we'll record and put on our website. Applications are due on the 31st, and we're hoping then, that should not say April 30th, sorry, that should say June. What we're hoping is in June that we will then be able to have our review committee, our selection committee, and then have those decisions decided here by the end of the month to let people know this is who will be awarded the grant for this year. In June, we'll send the letter of intent contract, which will then include any items that are needed with a contract. And so the letter will come to our applicant saying, hey, congratulations, you've been accepted. Here are the things that we need. Here's when we need them by to get that contract process started. We're hoping to then have those contracts start that process in July, and maybe by July, August, having the contract signed by the city with the notice to proceed. I do want to point out that the very bold statement at the bottom is that timeline is subject to change. There are a lot of factors that affect how quickly we can get those contracts through, and so this is the timeline we're hoping for. But there may be some unforeseen instances that might just delay here and there a little bit. But we are hoping to be able to get the letters out, get all of the information back for the contracts, get them to and through the city, and then once we get everything signed, we're then able to send that notice to proceed letter, which then gives everyone a full year from the time you get that letter to the end of the year of when you can then use your grant and grant funding for your water quality education. Talking about best practices for our grant. So our best practices, because our selection committee may not be as familiar, you're going to want to have a well-written grant that really defines your scope and activity. So what is it that your grant's going to have your group doing? What kind of activities will you do? What kind of project will it look like? Just helping everyone that's reading through the grant really understand what it is that you're trying to do. Again, our focus is education, our focus is water quality. So what is it that your grant is doing to help promote those two? Having your well-defined budget line items, right? So we know what it is that you're asking for funding. So here's our budget, here's where the funding will be going, here's how we're spending that grant money. Clear outcome goals. Making sure we understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish with your grant, and so that we understand that the goals are both measurable, qualitative and quantitative, and so that we know we're ultimately moving towards behavior change. So here's what we're doing with our grant, here's how the funding will be spending, here's how we know we're being successful with this grant, here's how we're going to measure those outcome goals. And then the final part of this page talks about the final report. So every grant that is received does have to submit a final report where you say, here's what we did, here's how many people, here are the dates, here's the outcomes, here's what our grant ended up looking at like when we were able to implement our project. You have 60 days from the time you've completed your grant to then submit that final report. When you are sending in your budget or when you're sending in your invoices, making sure you understand that the final 10% of the grant funds cannot be released until we get that final report. And so you can get the majority of your grant. This is a reimbursement grant, so you can get the majority of it before the end of those 60 days, but then to get that last 10%, we do have to have that final report with it. You can, again, wait till the end and submit your invoices all at once, but if you want to submit throughout, just know that that last 10% will come after or when we get that final report. A few other best practices. Make sure that you're looking at the current grant application because there have been a few slight changes to the grant application, so there's some updated information. You can submit that grant to us electronically or in person. In person, we do have our address listed both here and on the grant application, so you can either drop that off or send it to me via email. It is due on the 31st by 4 p.m. Make sure that you have signed all of the parts that the grant needs to be signed, making sure you understand what dates are listed, when we have to have it by, and then with the specific grant, understanding the reimbursement process. So they're paid by invoicing KC Water. If there are receipts to attach, make sure you've attached those to your invoice. The invoice has to have the date that you need it, or not the date you need it, but the invoice has to have date. We have received some invoices where when they're sent in, it doesn't have an actual date listed. So we do have to make sure that the dates are there, that your invoices are numbered. So is this your first invoice to us, a second invoice to us, etc. When you are using grant funds, it does have to be tax exempt. And so if you are tax exempt, make sure you're using that. If you are not tax exempt, talk to me directly when we talk about the grants process, because we can help with making sure that this particular project is tax exempt when you are purchasing items for your grant project. Again, it is specifically for this KC Water grant. And then finally, monthly invoices for contracts are ideal for reimbursement. So the regularly that sending it to us, we can then reimburse you throughout the grant process. If you want to wait, you're able to do so, but you then can also reimburse throughout the grant. And then, Leona, it looks like there may be people in the lobby. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you,
I just
Leona.
did it.
Perfect, thank you. And again, we are recording this presentation, so if at any point there's any information missed, feel free to go back and look at the recording. Also, feel free to ask questions because I am moving through this a little quickly, but I'm going to highlight a little bit about the application here in a second. But going through the last slide, it looks like the next slide we are going to talk about is the city contracts. And so Leona, I'm actually going to let you kind of highlight the key points on this part.
Oh, okay. The first thing here is the city vendor application. If you're already a city vendor, great. You don't have to redo it. If you're not, I can assist with providing you the link to the city vendor application and give you some key points as to how to submit that and who to submit it to. And it's actually a different department than us. It's our finance department who does it. So whatever's on the application has to be followed exactly, or else they will not um, approve it. They'll just keep asking for more information. So right now, I don't even know how long it is because I haven't looked at the form in a while, but they do ask a lot of tax questions and a lot of information about the company. Next thing is Part 1, Special Contract Terms and Conditions, Insurance Requirements. Very specific requirements are in here. Should you run into any questions about that, ask myself or Mary. There might be exemptions to the requirements needed, and that'll just have to be discussed on a project by project basis. Part 2, Standard Terms and Conditions, pretty lengthy, and it's across the board. So if you have any questions about that upon looking at it, please reach out to us. And the last one here is under $10,000 may not need a contract, still must be nonprofit. And I'll let Mary expand on that if she likes.
Thank you. And thank you, Leona, for going through that. Yeah, so anyone asking for any grant funds under 10,000, it may be that we do not need to go through a city contract. Those, again, will happen on a case-by-case basis. You still must be somebody that is eligible, so nonprofit, school, community group. So even though it may not be a contract, you still have to meet the guidelines of the actual grant outline. And so I'm going to briefly touch base on the application this year. If you've not had a chance to look at it, it is on the city website. You can find that through our website as well. But bringing up the current application. And can we see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Leona. Again, pretty standard, highlights our program goals. So the program goals really talk about, what it actually has to include, which are these 3 key points. It has to be education driven. It has to expand the scope of what we are doing with our KC Water education and outreach. And so if you have some questions on what our activities are doing, you can always look us up under our education page, because that'll highlight, like, here's the outreach we are doing. Because what we're hoping is that this will expand beyond it. And then looking at a partnership with KC Water Education Outreach. Are there ways we can help support your efforts? Are there platforms we can help promote water quality education, provide those lessons to your groups? All of the above are able to be partnerships. And then one or more of the following, which is, a reduction of stormwater runoff, because we know that stormwater runoff, if we can impact that, we can overall improve water quality. It can be public education on the importance of protecting infrastructure, or public action. So any of those can be included with our first 3 bullet points of, it being education, expanding what we do, partnership with us, and then one of the, action education or action on protecting infrastructure. I'm not going to read through the whole application, but you are free to read through this and ask questions. A couple key points I just want to point out. If you are looking at doing a project such as, green garden, outdoor classroom, rain garden, just making sure you have that maintenance plan of how are you going to maintain your unit. Eligible for funding just talks about who can get funding, what types of funding, and I'm actually going to decline that for now. What is eligible for funding. This will help you identify, what it is that our funding is able to be used on, spent on, and then outlining measurable outcomes versus measurable outputs, kind of looking at the difference, because we are working towards behavior change. And so we want to encourage our community partners to also focus on how to get towards that behavior change by having both outputs and specifically measurable outcomes. I'm looking at program. It's up to $100,000 that we have for this grant. The maximum that any applicant might request is up to $25,000. You're able to request for that full amount, but again, it's going to vary depending on what the review and selection committee decide on a grant by grant basis. I think that's about it. It does talk about types of expenses. It does highlight what expenses are not eligible. It does give a little bit about the selection process. I wanted to highlight the bonus criteria because what we're trying to identify is the area within the combined sewer system. And so there is a typo in this that we will make an addendum to the city website. It says it has to be south of the Missouri River, north of 85th Street. It says east of the Blue River, but that's the typo. It should be west of the Blue River. And so this is not a requirement. It's just bonus points if you're working within the combined sewer system. So that's kind of the oldest part of the Kansas City area. So south of the Missouri River, north of 85th, and then from state line to the Blue River. There's a little information about what happens after if groups are selected. Find my mouse again. So I'll let you read through that. This meeting that we are having, again, we'll post that online, and then the application deadline. The actual application form talks about the information for the contact person, some descriptions that you'll fill out and send to us, and then an example of a budget, an example of your schedule of when these items would happen, and then a page on the final report template. And again, that final report template is due within 60 days of the end of your project. So if your project happens throughout the year, just then that last one, 60 days. If it's a one-time event, then 60 days from that one-time event. So I know I went through this a little quickly, but all of this will be posted on the city website as well as some additional information on our KC Water website. And then we'll make that addendum about the location of the bonus criteria. And then if there are any questions, we'll also post those questions and answers on the city website. So back here. Any questions? Doesn't sound like it, so I will stop sharing.
What all kinds of equipment, like, testing equipment does the grant cover? Is it just as long as you can make a good case for it and it makes sense, or is there certain things that you would think are just not going to be covered? Or could you expand as far as like equipment goes? What kind of things you could expect to get approved?
Nope, that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that. Put it in your budget. Explain how it ties to your project. As long as your project is about water quality, is about education, is about helping address that behavior change, then you can tie this equipment is helping us with that project and it's in our budget. So then if you're approved and you're approved with that in your budget, then that's what you're able to spend your grant funding on. So any other questions? Nope.
I got another one.
Yeah.
As far as the education, what would you expect that to look like? Is it going to be more of a neighborhood thing where it's at, like where the place you're working at is, or should it be more of a broad, like what's the target demographic for the educational parts, or is that kind of you figure it out as you go and plan for exactly what you're wanting to target?
That would really be up to you as the applicant. Where is it that you're working in? The only thing that we specify is it has to be within Kansas City limits. So our grant funds have to be spent to then have efforts and outreach within that Kansas City region. So as long as you're within the city of Kansas City, it could be adult groups, it could be school groups, it could be community groups, neighborhood associations, church groups, it can be any group, because what we're hoping is that education that's engaging and promotes water quality will help us get towards that behavior change. And that's really what we want to see. And so that's why we have this piece specifically in there that talks about outputs versus outcomes. We do a lot of litter pickups. They're great. We're happy to have them, but we also want to see how is those efforts helping lead towards behavior change. Is that an assessment, before and after? Is that asking people through maybe a Facebook poll or emails, what are some of the things that stood out? What's something that you might change? And so really kind of just getting those assessments of how are we approaching and hopefully addressing that behavior change. So all really good questions. Nope. And thank you all again for joining us. If at any point you have any questions that you think of, feel free to reach out, because I know that this grant is due at the end of the month. And so I'll be on the lookout for any maybe additional questions or comments. We'll get this video posted to the website. We'll make those changes on our city website. And then, yeah, we're excited. We're excited for partnerships with all of our community partners. We're excited to see how you all approach water quality education, because yeah, we would love to see behavior change in Kansas City, because we know the positive impact you all will have.
Cool, thanks.
All right.
Appreciate
Thank
it.
you all. Thank you for joining. I'm actually going to stop recording now.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Mary.
All right. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.